This month on Mainsail, we're in Lisbon for the penultimate act of this year's Extreme Sailing Series. The Extremes were the first to introduce the concept of stadium sailing, bringing events into areas where the public couldn't fail to notice it, but where races had never been staged before. As a result, the Extremes needed to overcome a big problem. Bring the racetrack into the city, and life can get pretty hard for the sailors. The wind's massively affected by the buildings. The racetrack, well, the size of whatever you've got available. From experience, it can sometimes feel like a bit of a lottery. Which begs the question, can you really stage a sailing race anywhere? The Extremes tested that question to the limit when they came to Singapore. The location could not be more spectacular, nor could it be closer to thousands of commercial partners, all eager to embrace a world-class sailing series. But at times, the standards for competitive sailing were reaching the margins of viability. On most days, the lack of wind was the issue. On another, it was gusty and so erratic that sailors found it challenging to predict.
There's a mast come down.
Oh my goodness!
Men are in the water.
Two boats locked together.
Aberdeen are on top of Groupama. I have never seen anything like this in my life.
It's one thing to be able to watch sailing from your office window, but when those same buildings are impacting the racing, is it the best advertisement for the sport? There's clearly a science behind finding the right balance. And so I sat down with the guys who make those brave decisions when choosing the extreme venues.
I mean, this series is renowned, isn't it, for taking sailing to places where sailing doesn't normally happen. There's no history of it. I mean, how do you make that work, and what are the factors you have to consider?
The easy bit is finding somewhere to sail in a lot of the venues, but the difficult bit is finding the race course to provide the racing and achieve the proximity to actually get the engagement for the public, for the guests, for the media as well.
So a lot of the beautiful sailing venues don't work very well commercially. The Caribbean's a great place to go sailing. You've got fantastic trade winds. My mum could run the racing, but it just doesn't work commercially.
I mean, I remember some of the early events that I did and turning up and wondering how we were going to move our boats, how we were going to survive here.
Well, the sailors are very skilled. I mean, you could not do this high-speed racing in confined spaces unless you've got highly skilled sailors.
We definitely don't want to tune the boats down so they're not able to perform at the high speeds, but we still want to be able to keep the show going.
Let's talk about a venue that's been particularly challenging to make work.
Well, I think St. Petersburg would be a great example. It's a fantastic city. It ticks all our boxes. It's iconic, it's in the centre of the city, the backdrop's great, the sailing is good, but it's a very confined space. There's so much traffic there, we have to let the traffic run along the side of our course. There's tide running through or current running through the course the whole time, and sometimes there's light winds, so we have to ensure that boats don't drift out into the path of these high-speed hydrofoils and the rest of the traffic.
For me, the other thing about St. Petersburg is it's a long, narrow track. And we were very fortunate in that the breeze was coming down from the top of the course all the way down. And to try and run a race in that venue with the breeze either coming from the north or the south, that would have been very interesting.
The first meeting we have with the local authorities at new venues is always entertaining, because typically what they do is they go on the internet and they Google Extreme Sailing Series, and they've got a list of crash videos this long. So you go to see them and they're saying, you guys must be crazy if you think we're going to allow you to run this in our river.
So clearly creating a totally new sailing event from a blank page is fraught with difficulties. And whilst it's hard to fault the ambition to bring sailing to new audiences and create a strong commercial interest in the sport, as the man that created the Extreme Series format freely admits, if you get those logistics wrong, there are plenty of critics ready to pounce.
As you develop something which actually your primary focus to begin with is create a new commercial product, that was our focus. You challenge what people consider to be credible from a sporting perspective. The thing that saved the Extreme Sailing Series, and actually today I'm not sure everybody really has understood this still, is that all those events, they normally raced over between 25 to 35 races. And so statistically, it doesn't matter if you're sailing in amongst the high-rise buildings, every time the best team won.
When the America's Cup World Series came to the iconic city of New York, it grabbed all the headlines for the sport. However, it also created a huge amount of debate about the trend of stadium sailing. With only 3 races scheduled per day, the need for steady and fair racing conditions was crucial, but those perfect conditions had to also occur within the limited live TV window. All of this, amidst one of the most built-up metropolitan areas on the planet, created some frustrating moments.
Racing yachts, this is the race committee. I'm not happy that this is a fair race, so I'm going to abandon this.
A few months later, the America's Cup moved on to Portsmouth, where the stadium course there generated some fantastic sailing. The man responsible for that location was Rob Andrews, who had also overseen the course at the 2012 Olympics, an event where stadium sailing's under even more scrutiny.
As we moved towards 2012, it became apparent that we had to deliver a sailing audience, and people wanted a sailing audience. Creating that area there with the nose and the stadium, it gave an opportunity for 5,000 people to be part of those amazing sporting times, and I think for me it was almost like the sport coming of age.
I suppose I think of myself racing in that scenario, you know, often the athletes have invested a lifetime, you know, and millions have been spent on that moment, on delivering a medal, and to increase the risk in any way, it's hard to swallow.
Perhaps that's just the nature of elite sport. You know, we're dealing with nature. You do have to have a little bit of luck in terms of the weather, but you know, if you look back historically from Weymouth and Rio, I think the right people won the medals.
CEO of World Sailing Andy Hunt believes that stadium sailing is actually a necessary natural evolution for sailing to ensure its growth into a popular sport for the fans.
You know, in the past, if you wanted to watch racing, whether that was the Olympics or the America's Cup, you went out in a boat and you were out there all day, and you stood there with the binoculars and tried to watch the action. I mean, the spectator experience is very different now.
Well, I think you can still have a fantastic day out on the water as a spectator on a boat, but you can never get enough people out on the water. You never really have a complete view of what's going on to really understand what's happening. And actually the the fan wants a completely different experience. They want an event. You know, they want somewhere where they can take their children, take their partners, have great food, great drink, be able to watch things on screen, but a dip out of watching things live. It's an entire event, and that's really where sport has gone. And sailing, of course, needs to keep up with that.
So the format, it seems to work for the crowds, to work for television, and it engages sponsors. When we come back, we'll ask the sailors just what they make of it all. But for now, let's catch up with the rest of the sailing news.
The dates have now been announced for the 2017 edition of the Volvo Ocean Race. This classic round-the-world team challenge will start on October 22nd with a 700-mile sprint from Alicante to Lisbon. Mainsail will keep you up to speed with next year's Volvo qualifying events, including the famous Rolex Fastnet race. Last month also brought sad news about a former Volvo Ocean Race sailor, Guo Xuan, who was reported lost at sea while attempting a record trans-Pacific solo crossing. Guo was China's most famous offshore sailor and no stranger to dangerous ocean journeys, having successfully set a record for crossing the Arctic Ocean last year. Giovanni Soldini was first across the line in the Rolex Middle Sea race. He set a new record for multi-hulls, completing the 600-mile classic race in just over 2 days. George David's Rambler 88 was the first monohull to finish, but despite gaining line honours, it was Vincenzo Arato's Cookson 50, Mascalzone Latino, that took the overall trophy.